It's Diane Shields, and I'm happy to see you today. I am a history teacher, and today I'd like to talk to you about someone that we're all very familiar with. He married, after all, one of our first ladies. I want to talk to you about a man called Aristotle Onassis. Do you know that name? Of course you do. So, for most Americans, we didn't even completely understand who he was, or how did he get wealthy, or how did he enter our world. We only know that Jackie Kennedy, 5 years after the death of her husband, is going to marry Aristotle. And he sort of changes her life, and although most Americans were just so opposed to this, and we thought she lost her mind, but she hadn't. We couldn't understand quite why she had married him. Because he was rather strange looking. His nickname was the Spider. Regardless, she married him and he becomes part of our life, and we studied up on him. Before we get to that episode with Jackie Kennedy, let me just give you some basic information. He was Greek. He was not born in Greece. He was born in Turkey, but that was ruled at the time by Greek government. He was born in the year 1906. And he lived a good life, not a long life. He was dead by the time he was 69. And he died from a respiratory problem caused by a chronic disease that he'd been struggling with for years. So when he was not born into a super duper wealthy family at all. Eventually they left Turkey and went to Greece and got themselves settled in. But young Aristotle was very unique, very, very different, very odd. He was just like this little entrepreneur, always looking for business opportunities. He wanted to be very wealthy and very powerful. And so probably when he was maybe 17 or 18, most of us are pretty young still, in school, he took off and he went down to Argentina and he bought a tobacco farm. Big investment for a person his age. He spent just about all of his money on the investment, and he became very, very successful. So here he is, a young man down in Argentina, and he has his own business, and he becomes very wealthy, and now this is the very beginning of this lifestyle that we hear about many, many years later. Oh my gosh, my good friends, there are probably 12 to 15 different gigantic business ventures that he got involved with, invested money. Almost every one of them paid back. His, very wealthy, I have $200,000, now I have, $200 million. It's a constant road that he travels on. He was very personable, and that always helps, doesn't it? He was charming. He had a good sense of humor. He liked to laugh. He liked to dance. He enjoyed the good life. He will travel and live in many different places, and he had the money to do this when he's still in his 20s and 30s. He had many women in his life. Oh, it was quite the coup to have a date with Aristotle Onassis. And he traveled the world. He came to the United States many times. He loved our New York City. He even built a big hotel here called the Olympic, is what he called it, kind of in comparison to all of our other great skyscrapers that we have. He married eventually. He was 40 and his bride was 17. Wow. By this time, he is one of the wealthiest men in the world. What really took him to the top, all right, was getting involved in what we call the shipping business. And when I say shipping business, I'm talking about huge ships that sail the ocean, huge freighters, tankers, and all they do back and forth all day long is carry cargo. Somebody says, oh, I have this and I need to get it to Paris, or I need to get it down to Brazil. And you could, get it on one of his ships. Of course, he charged you a fortune, but people had no other choice. His was the best of all lines. And he will become really probably a billionaire under this shipping business. Now, the woman that he married, or really the girl, her father was also in the shipping business. So there was a competition between Aristotle and his father-in-law. So I don't know, I think that there was probably love and affection, but I also think there was a sweet little business deal, and Aristotle might have thought he got one over, on his shipping competition, now his father-in-law. Her name, his wife, her name was Athena, and they called her Tina. And they will have 2 children, and we know their children. They had a daughter who was also called Christina, and they had a son. His name was Alexander, a good Greek name, and you can't help but think of Alexander the Great. And I want you to know that even though Aristotle might not have been the best of husbands, and certainly not a faithful husband, he traveled internationally. He was in that big, what they called the jet sets, He was very good to his children. He doted upon his children. He gave them everything, and he loved them, really and truly, my friends. So he's married. He has the 2 children. He's just getting richer and richer every single solitary day. Eventually, he and his first wife will divorce. And most of the reasons were because of his infidelities. This first wife had heard that he was having an affair with a very notorious opera singer. I know. Have you ever heard of a woman called Maria Callas? Sure you have. Well, she was the voice in the 50s, 60s. Well, he had been with many famous women, many talented women, but this one was one that he was going to keep. And so he and his wife will divorce, and he then begins a long-time affair with Maria Callas. They never married, but they had a real commitment, it appears, and they would be seen together all the time, and they were quite an item. Both of those people, she's also Greek, were very high-tempered people. Some of their fights that they would have, you might call them strong arguments that they would have in public, people would read about. They'd be in the, the society pages, things of this type. But in many ways, they must have been compatible, and they had a really, really strong relationship. Maria Callas had a very jealous disposition, and if she ever saw Aristotle maybe being friendly to a woman or a picture of him in the newspaper, well, that all came to an end real fast. Maria Callas was not going to tolerate that. So, after about being with Maria Callas, about maybe 8 years, things changed greatly for our Aristotle. And this is when we now enter into the story of the Kennedys. Aristotle Ness is super duper uber wealthy. So too were the Kennedys, weren't they? Joe Kennedy, the father of Jack Kennedy, very, very wealthy, a mover and a groover, a man of great infidelities himself, great appetites on many different levels. They, of course, had many things in common, and so they knew each other, they'd met each other. So Aristotle kind of just eases on in as an acquaintance and a friend to the Kennedys, especially John Kennedy. How exciting. John Kennedy was, running for the House of Representatives, and he's running for, the Senate, and now, my gosh, he's running for the president, and that's just right up the alley of Aristotle. Those were the men he wanted to be friends with and be seen with. Who couldn't but be attracted to Jackie Kennedy? She was so beautiful, so French, so genteel, so fashionable. And we know that a friendship developed between Jackie and Aristotle. Now, whether or not they had any kind of consummated relationship, I truly don't know. However, they did have a friendship, and when there would be difficult times, Mrs. Kennedy had a miscarriage, you might recall, Aristotle, in his friendship, would always reach out to her. And he would say, do you need any help? Do you just need to get away? He had already purchased a lovely little island right off the mainland of Greece. It's called Scorpios. So he was a good friend. This was what he did. This was how he was with people that he liked and admired. And she would go to Scorpios. She would She would have dinner on his great yacht, the Christina, one of the largest yachts in the world at that time. But you know, she came back home, she'd be our first lady. But then in 1963, my good friends, Jack Kennedy was killed. Jack Kennedy was assassinated, wasn't he, in Dallas? And this was just a devastation to Jackie Kennedy. She's a young woman, she has 2 small children. Her husband, in his first term, violently assassinated. And she was filled with despair, and she was filled with great sadness. And Aristotle reached out to her and said, why don't you just get away? Why don't you come to Scorpios? I will take excellent care of you. I will have security. Nobody can hurt you, Jackie. And she did. We know that for a fact she went there and took her children and tried to heal as best she could. And again, I have no idea what was going on with them on a personal level. Nobody does, I don't believe. She came back to the United States. She has her 2 children. She's raising them. And then, 5 years after the death of her own husband in 1968, do you remember that Robert Kennedy was assassinated? My God, this is unthinkable. Have you ever heard of something called the Kennedy curse? Well, this was a big story. This was a lot of believing that the Kennedys were just all meant to die some kind of unexpected, violent way. And when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, this really turned everything upside down for Jackie. And she called Aristotle Onassis, who was in a relationship still with Maria Callas. And she said, I got to get out. I have to leave the United States. I don't want to be here. This country is violent. Somebody's out to kill the Kennedys, and my children are Kennedys, are going to kill my children. And Aristotle said to Jackie Kennedy, don't worry, pack your bags, come to Scorpios, Greece, and I will protect you and I will protect your children. And she did. This, of course, was very bad news for Maria Callas. There will be many big fights between Maria Callas and Aristotle, but he was there for our Jackie. No doubt, and we're talking psychology here, Aristotle liked to have beautiful women on his arm. That made him feel more powerful about himself. And what other woman could possibly be overshadowed by any other woman but our own Jackie Kennedy? What a coup for him to have her in his protection. She goes, brings her children, and you know what? He kept his word. He kept her very safe. Perfect security, perfect ease of everything, total, complete luxury. And at the time, kind of isolated on the island, very safe. He begins his courtship of our former First Lady. He proposed to Jackie, and this is what we know. She said no. She said, I can't afford to marry you. She said, when I married Jack Kennedy, I was given $3 million by the Kennedys, and it's in an estate. Only, however, if I would marry again, then I lose that $3 million. Now today, $3 million may not seem that extreme, but trust me, in the 1960s, $3 million was a huge amount. She also was getting a guarantee of a certain amount of money per month just to help her with her cost of living, her living expenses, and raising the children. So she said she just couldn't. She would not give up the $3 million. Well, this is Aristotle Onassis. So he said to her, if you lose the $3 million, I will give you $3 million. If you're used to a specific amount of money, just to pay your bills and your living expenses, I will also pay that to you. He said, I understand you'll lose everything if you marry, but you will gain it all back when you marry me. Well, she wasn't sure. She didn't know what to do here. So of all of the people in the world, she called her brother-in-law, Ted Kennedy. I know. And she told Ted, this is my dilemma. Aristotle Onassis wants to marry me. He will replenish all the money I lose by marrying him, plus an additional like $10 million, plus $150,000 every month, all right, during their marriage and after his death as well. Ted Kennedy said, don't do anything until I get there. He immediately flies to Scorpios. He had already met Aristotle. And Aristotle's lawyers and Kennedy and his lawyers met for several weeks, and they worked out a deal that was very financially nice for Jackie Kennedy. She didn't lose a single nickel, plus she gained a great deal of money. And when Ted Kennedy said to her, you're set, he said, I don't want you to marry him. You know, I want you to go back to the United States and marry somebody else, a nice American man. She would say, no, if I am secure financially, and my children are, I'm going to go ahead and marry him. And it was such a shock. Don't you remember when we heard that she was going to marry this strange-looking Greek man? You know, very wealthy, yes, but strange. But she married him. And I want you to know that he was good to her. He was generous to her. They traveled everywhere. He had a home in Paris. He had a home in New York, which she did as well. He had a home down in Brazil. And then that yacht, oh my gosh, that beautiful, beautiful, gigantic yacht called the Christina. He was very good to her. I don't know this for sure, but it appears to be a real story. After they had been married for just a couple of years, and I guess maybe the fascination or just, you know, the way, the patterns of his life, he got back with Maria Callas. And he and Maria sort of resumed their relationship. Jackie was aware of it, so we think that maybe her relationship with Aristotle was not necessarily like young love, romantic love, but a security love, a platonic kind of love, and taking care of her children in their teenage years, certainly. Eventually, our Jackie and Aristotle will separate. They did not divorce, but she comes to New York and started working for a publishing firm, and Aristotle stayed back in Greece. Now, Aristotle will die when he was 69 years old, and Jackie will be with him, and Jackie, of course, went to the funeral, and I can tell you that when the will was read, he kept his word on everything. He gave Jackie a tremendous amount of money, but it was nothing compared to the rest of his estate. So he had a daughter, he had the two children, Christina and Alexander, and he gave the bulk of his estate to his daughter, Christina. And Christina worried that Jackie was going to contest the will, that Jackie wasn't going to be satisfied with like this, you know, additional $25, $30 million that she would receive. And so Christina and our Jackie got into very bad disputes following the death of Aristotle. And finally, Jackie will settle with Christine, and she says, I promise I will not contest the will. But Jackie also got several $1 million more out of it. It was not a good relationship between Aristotle's daughter and our Jackie Kennedy. Now remember, Aristotle had the two children from his first wife, Christina, and then there was a son, Alexander. By the time Aristotle dies, his son is already dead. It's very bad. He had a son who looks a lot like him, just a bon vivant, another charmer, wealthiest, you know, bachelor in all the kingdom. And he was fascinated with the airline business and flying and things of this type. And Aristotle's son, Alexander, will die in a aircraft accident, a helicopter and a plane on the ground. And that will be the end of Aristotle's son. It pained Aristotle so much. They said, including our Jackie Kennedy, simply said, he's never going to get over this, and he didn't. So the son died in 1973. Aristotle died 2 short years later, and he was not healthy during any of that time. Let me show you some pictures, and let's see what we have, all right? I think he looks a lot like Al Pacino in The Godfather here, but see what you think. So here you have a young, very sophisticated looking, oh my gosh, that's really something. Look at that hair plastered down like that. This is a young Aristotle Onassis, born in 1906, died in 1975, 69 years old. He was born in Turkey, but immediately when he was a child, his parents took him to Greece, and he just gets involved in many different businesses. And the one that will really take him over the top is his shipping business. Ships, great big gigantic tankers like oil tankers and freighters, carrying everybody's wares all over the world. And this will make him a billionaire. He had 2 wives. He had his first wife, who was Athena, and they had 2 children. And then he divorced the first wife, had a major public affair with Maria Callas. And then his second wife, of course, will be Jackie Kennedy. And they will stay married until his death, but they had separated a couple years before. Here he is, looking quite successful, a little bit older perhaps. I don't know, maybe in his 40s perhaps, very dapper. But here he is. By this time, by this age, he is a world famous personality. I can tell you that he had the 2 wives. I can tell you about Maria Callas, but trust me, there were many women in his life. Many business deals, money here, money there, in just gigantic numbers. You know, he started out with a tobacco farm. I mean, he's very young, sells that, invested in something else, had his own airlines for a while, called it the Olympic Airlines. He just had his fingers on so many different things. The shipping business will be the biggest and the most rewarding of all. Here is a picture of him with his first wife. Her name again was Athena. She was very pretty. Remember, he married her when he was 40 and she was 17. Oh, that doesn't seem very savory, does it? Regardless, there she is. She certainly was a wealthy woman or girl before she married him. Her father was Aristotle's great competition in the shipping business. And for many years, we're told that it was a good marriage and a good partnership. She had the 2 children. He loved the children. Nobody disputes that. And he was good to the children. But he was just a man with a very healthy appetite, and whatever he wanted to do, he did. And that will include many women. And eventually that marriage is going to come to closure with a divorce. Here's an interesting picture that you might recognize some people. So in the middle, of course, we have Ari. This is Ari like I know him. I don't know him. Aristotle. This is kind of what he's starting to look like when we start to have him in our world. So here you have Aristotle, not a very tall man. Oh, do you recognize Grace Kelly? I know, look how modestly she's dressed. And over here, of course, the hot-headed, very temperamental, gigantic, talented Maria Callas. This was just, you know, the crowd. These were the wealthy people. These were the movers and the shakers. And trust me, he's right in the thick of it. The parties, oh my God, the jets, the yachts. It's just a phenomenal lifestyle. Here you have a picture of Ari with Maria Callas. This is going to be like right before we meet him with Jackie Kennedy. Happy man, wearing those big glasses. And look at Maria with all the heavy makeup and the eyeliners and things of this type. You know, just an incredible lifestyle. And when Maria hears about his friendship with Jackie Kennedy, she did not like it at all. And when he would reach out to Jackie to say, I can give you some security, you know, like when John Kennedy was assassinated, he invited her to come. He took care of her. He took care of her children. Maria Callas didn't like any of that. And she was right to not like it, because Aristotle would have already shifted his affections and his, you know, what it was he needed in his own life to make him feel more successful. He was ready to let go of Maria and now become part of Jackie Kennedy's life. And of course, as you know, he does just that. Excuse me. I don't have a picture to show you of the yacht. It was called the Christina after his daughter, just the largest yacht at the time. But this is an interior shot of the dining room, a buffet, the tables. You can't imagine. This was like a 5-star hotel. He traveled the world on his yacht. It was the most famous of all yachts that you could imagine. And of course, this is where Jackie would be entertained, and the parties and the helicopter pad. Not bad. What a life. What luxurious living, certainly. I told you that he did marry our Jackie, and here's a wedding picture of them. Here you, oh my gosh, here you have our beautiful, serene-looking Jackie Kennedy, as we know her, and here she has herself with her new groom, her husband. He was about 20 years older than Jackie. She tells you and me, all right, via her friendships and her letters that we can see, that she liked Aristotle. He was fun, he was paternal, generous, and she was safe. And she said, all I wanted after Bobby Kennedy's death was safe. I wanted my children to be safe, and Aristotle gave it to her. She would never have a complaint, ever, about him. He took excellent care of her. I'm sure that, you know, she could be aloof at times, and I'm sure he could be as well. It's sad to think that eventually he turned back to Maria Callas, perhaps as friends, perhaps as a very strong romance, I don't know. But eventually Jackie Kennedy will simply leave. Her children will be older, safer, and she missed the United States after turning her back on us for quite a few years. She married him in 1968, and he died in 1975. And she came back here probably about maybe 72, 73, something like that. So it was not a bad life with Aristotle, but it was, you know, very, very wealthy, perhaps selfish people living the life that they want to live. Here's a very pretty picture of both of them. I mean, she seems very happy. She did not lack for anything. And there, of course, is Aristotle, one of the most famous, wealthiest men in the whole wide world. She made a good partnership here. But, you know, she changed her look, and we didn't like that either. We were used to her being in high couture. She was our fashion plate, certainly. But now she was an island girl. Now she wore the big sunglasses and the bandanas in her hair. And we saw her in, you know, jeans and capri pants. Here's a picture of the new Jackie Kennedy that Aristotle enabled her to have. Remember pictures like this? Well, there he is. And here's our Jackie with her big shades, her big sunglasses, and jeans, for God's sake, you know, little t-shirts. She became truly an island, relaxed, laid-back kind of person. She let her hair grow kind of long. And she's on a whole nother route for her life and her destiny. This is a picture of Aristotle and his adult daughter, Christina. She's very pretty, very attractive. And there is Aristotle with his daughter. And her name was Christina, and they also called her Tina. His yacht was named after his daughter, huh? Well, you can imagine when this young girl was, you know, single, and she was, I believe at that time, the most eligible woman in the world for anybody to marry. But she had problems, my friends. She had issues with her identity, with just all of that fame. And you know, when you have all that money, you don't know, do people really like me or do they just want my money? I've never had that problem. But it was a real genuine problem for her. So she married a lot, like 4 or 5 times. And she only stayed married a couple of times. And then she married her last husband, and they will have a child. And they named that little child, it was a girl. They named that child after the grandmother, Aristotle's first wife. They named that child Athena. And Athena is alive and well today. She's in her 30s, her late 30s, and she lives mostly in South America. She had married, and it seemed to be a good marriage, to a polo player, but that marriage just ended about 2 years ago. She does not like to have anything to do with Greece. She does not want to have too much to do with the whole onassis ancestry. So she has sold many of Aristotle's homes that he had. She sold the island of Scorpios. And that was a big deal because this island is where Aristotle's buried, his son Alexander's buried, and today Christina, her mother, is buried there. But she sold the island of Scorpios to a billionaires, a Russian billionaires, who still owns it today and wants to turn it into kind of a playground for the very wealthy people. I do also have a picture to show you. It's a little blurry and I don't know why, but I'll share it with you. Here is a picture of Aristotle with his son. Oh, his beloved son. He was grooming him to follow everything, to be the lead in the Onassis empire, certainly. And then, of course, the son died when he was just in his 20s. You know, an accident? Maybe not an accident. Aristotle hired lawyers. He argued a great deal. He believed that his son was intentionally murdered. But if that's the case, we've never heard anything about it at all. But great sadness when he lost his son. And he just never really got better, never really got over it. And he would have been maybe 67 when his son when his son died. And of course, he's dead just 2 years later. Aristotle died in Paris, France. He was not on Scorpios. He had been traveling. He had a home, big apartment home, if you will, in a hotel. And he died in a hospital. Very, very sad news. And I can tell you that Jackie Kennedy went to his funeral and probably waited to see the reading of the will, just to see what she would get. And she got a lot, you know, like maybe $25 million. Here's another picture of our new Jackie. There you see them. This is Scorpios in the background. You see them in a small little ferry boat of some type, a John boat of some type, and he's no doubt going out to the great big yacht, the Christina. There she is, all covered up with those glasses and the scarf on her head. I mean, what a man Aristotle was. Must have just been fascinating, just absolutely fascinating to be with somebody that had everything. Must have been very bright when you think of all of his business adventures. Just to feel safe with somebody who can give you everything. Here's a much better picture of Aristotle's son, Alexander. I know, he looks a great deal like his father. And sad to say, he's gone, and he is buried today on Scorpios Island, excuse me. The Russian girl that bought the island is going to kind of preserve the Aristotle Onassis compound. He had several homes in this one beachy area, and the graveyard that is there. I don't know if you've been to Scorpios. I haven't, but here's a picture of it, an aerial shot. Really what I've pinpointed here is his home. So all of this, it's a very primitive island. It's a good sized island, completely surrounded, of course, as an island would, with water. This is his compound. This is his primary home, where he and, of course, Jackie Kennedy would have lived in. Is just posh beyond anything that you could imagine. And the cemetery where they're buried is a little over here on the side itself. So he had 2 children. His son died very prematurely, like about age 23. His daughter, Christina, married 4 or 5 times. She was just a very unhappy, couldn't find any joy in her life, and to be joyless is really awful, isn't it? So she was constantly searching for something, and then finally, after she was married to her last husband, a Frenchman, she really thought, this is it, I guess, and they had a child that they called Athena. Athena today is, I believe, the 2nd wealthiest woman in the world, 38 years old. And she was that wealthy when she was like, 10. Oh my gosh. So here's a picture of Aristotle Onassis' granddaughter when she was very little, and isn't she precious, huh? There she is as a young girl. She is, at this time, when this photograph was taken, she is considered one of the wealthiest women in the world, one of the wealthiest children in the world. For the most part, her father helped raise her. She lived with him in Paris, and I don't know if he just had, bad stories about, her mother, or bad stories about the whole Greek lifestyle. I don't know. But today, when we do hear from her, which is so rare, she really doesn't even really associate with the onassis legacy. She has the money. She's a horsewoman in equestrian today. She participates in polo herself. And she had married finally. It appeared a good marriage, as we said earlier, but then they divorced a couple years ago. And here is Athena Onassis as she is today. About 38 years old. She's very attractive, very stylish. We just never hear anything about her. Like with her mother, Christina, parties and, all kinds of little nasty stories that you would hear. With this young woman, Aristotle's granddaughter, she's so private that there's just very little news that we know about her at all. So that's my story. Aristotle Onassis, oh my gosh, he was just so fascinating. Made his own wealth, made his own life. The tobacco farm, which then he sells and makes a fortune, and he got involved in so many things. He loved the city or the community, Principality of Monaco. He even tried to take over all the businesses, including that great casino. He knew Prince Rainier very well. They fought over many things. It's just a bigger life than most of us will ever know. And we aren't particularly surprised that Jackie Kennedy would maybe lean toward that wealth, that comfort, just to be safe and protected. And he gave that to her. We didn't like him. We didn't like the man at all, and we thought he was disgusting looking and so old when she could have all these young people. But for Jackie, I believe it was a really good decision. He lost his one son, never really recovered from it. And then after Aristotle's own death in 1975, about 10, 12 years later, his daughter will also die. Some people thought maybe it was a suicide, but all of the records, and maybe records can be bought, I don't know, all of the records will tell you that she had a health problem and probably took too many drugs and maybe blended them with alcohol sometimes, but no one lists her death as a suicide itself. Fascinating man, isn't he? Fascinating man, and it makes you kind of just get more and more interested. If you haven't read any biographies on Aristotle, there are some good ones that are out there. He will fade away from our history, won't he? Just as, believe it or not, Jackie Kennedy will. But in our time, your period and my period, he was a big deal. And of course, he lured our former First Lady out of our country. But she did come back to us. She did come back to us for sure. I hope I shared some good information with you. I'll see you another day. Bye-bye, everyone.